Thank you very much for the introduction, Mr. Peter. It's a pleasure to be participating in this PSCC. So I will present my work with the title Adaptive and Frequency Load Sharing in Systems with Renewable Energy Sources and Storage Capability, carried out in conjunction with Tatiana Assis, professor at Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. Starting with the outline that show what I will present, first I will show a short introduction of this work, followed by the presentation of the proposed adaptive and frequency load sharing method and the results obtained in this implementation. Finally, the conclusions obtained in the work are shown. So, firstly, a brief introduction. The main objective of this work is to propose an adaptive and frequency load sharing method suitable for power systems with high penetration of renewable generation and energy storage devices. To look at this object, we can take two questions that describe the core of the work. The first one, what is the adaptive and frequency load sharing method? And the second, what is the importance of evaluating this method in scenarios like this? And the frequency load sharing is a stream action taken on power systems when critical frequency dips arise. Such frequency dips are results of severe generation deficits and require the rejection of part of the load in order to reestablish the balance between load and generation. Traditional load sharing schemes work with load amounts to be removed previously defined, regardless of the degree of the power deficit. This is a robust and successful scheme. However, it can result in a great rejection than necessary. To mitigate this effect, some studies propose the development of adaptive methods of load sharing. Methods that, based on monitoring the state of network, seek to estimate the deficit and reduce the load sharing. So a question that can be done is how to estimate the power deficit. Many authors propose the use of the equivalent swing equation to estimate the active power imbalance. The use of this equation is based on knowledge of the inertia constant and the rate of change of frequency at the time of disturbance occurring. This estimation is based on the natural inertial response of synchronous machines when a frequency sink in the systems occurs. However, the high penetration of renewable sources and energy storage devices causes a change in conventional behavior of the frequency, and consequently, the adaptive method must consider this change for increasing the robustness of execution. So what are the impacts of the high penetration of these devices? Renewable energy sources impact mainly on two aspects: inaccuracy caused in the estimation of the equivalent inertia of the system and the power variations caused by the variations of primary energy source. The storage devices can be used to supply a synthetic frequency control, providing an inertia response and a primary frequency reserve. However, due to the limitation of the stage of charge, this supply can be interrupted during a critical condition of frequency sink, impairing the execution of the adaptive method. Such drawbacks means that the adaptive method has to deal with these issues for a correct execution. In the context, the present method has been proposed. The proposed approach can be summarized by the flowchart. The proposed method presents features proposed in different references combined in a single scheme, such as these points. However, as our time is reduced, I will briefly go through the main points, such as the beginning of the method, a data acquisition and disturber detection. As a premise, it is assumed that these two operations are guaranteed considering the use of wide area monitoring systems, providing full network observability. Following the flowchart, we arrive at an important point, the initial deficit estimate. Initial because during the execution, the imbalance itself is updated. The imbalance is calculated through two parts. One, referring to the oscillation equation, and the other to follow the dynamic behavior of the load. After initially estimating the power deficit, the amount of programming for each stage is calculated. The load shedding performance in stage so that between each stage, the system has the chance to recover itself. This table shows the estimated percentage to cut between each stage based on the calculated deficit. If the frequency is falling and there is no capacity of the system to prevent this, the distribution of the shed is made between the loads and executed. An important question is about the update of the inertia constant and the power deficit on the system during the execution of the load shedding. Through the system response to a node system, that is, the load shed performance, the system inertia can be corrected. The proposed method also considers the participation of devices with synthetic control in the participation of the inertia response. As example used in the study, the modeling of storage service of inertial response in primary reserve. The proposed method is not specific for any type of storage or control. It's enough to know the inertial behavior in relation to Rokoff in the level of the stage of charge as follows. In this work, we adopted that if the level of ACOC is between 10 and 20%, the inertia of the device is the cut-off zone, where the increment of the storage should not be accounted for as power support by the method. From the moment, I will take about the results found in the implementation of the method in a MATLAB toolbox. The test system chosen consists of 3 scenarios based on modified IEEE New England system, as shown in figure. The first case, called C0, is the traditional base case of New England with conventional generation. The second case, C1, consists of replacing conventional generators with RES, with a penetration level of approximately 24%. The generators are replaced by a full converter wind turbine and by photovoltaic generation. It's important to note that neither of the two technologies used high synthetic frequency control. That is, the system inertia and the regulation capacity are depreciated in case C1 in relation to case C0. And the third and last case, C2, consists of the application of energy storage with inertial response and primary frequency reserve in conjunction with RES of case C1. The next step is to evaluate the performance of the proposed method in 3 different scenarios, comparing the proposed approach with 3 other methods of load shedding. The first method, called LES1, is an adaptive method proposed in this reference. The second method, also an adaptive method called LES2, was taken from this reference. For the sake of time, I will not be able to go into details of each method, but it's important to note that the method proposed in this work has characters present in both works. And finally, the third method, a traditional method based on the Brazilian load shedding schemes. The first, the base case, concerns the assessment of load shedding schemes after the loss of the line between buses 16 and 19, causing the disconnection of 2 generators. The collapse frequency threshold assumed as 57 Hz, generally in system of 60 Hz, below the threshold occurs the shutdowns of plants due to the under-frequency protection, causing cascade shutdowns and the collapse of the system. All load shedding schemes can prevent frequency collapse. However, the traditional schemes performs excessive load shedding, characterized by the overshooting seen in the frequency curve. The LS2 method does not consider the correction of the dynamic behavior of the load in estimate a smaller power deficit compared to the LS1 and the proposed method. In systems with high voltage dips, these characteristics can cause the system collapse. As there is no change in inertial deficits during the execution of the load shedding schemes, the LS1 method and the proposed method show similar performance. The next case, a case with reduction of the system inertia, the figure shows the behavior of the system frequency in case C1 for the same loss of line at 0.3 seconds. However, in this case, the negative variation of the solar generation is simulated at 5 seconds. The traditional method again performs a overshed, which is softened by the variation of the solar generation. Both LS1 and LS2 methods are unable to prevent frequency collapse. While LS1 does not update the power deficit during the execution of the load shedding, LS2 is sensitive to the great voltage dips in case C1. Therefore, a great load variation and a small estimation for the power deficit. The proposed method deals with these issues. It performs a good dynamic performance. This result is a stable behavior of the frequency, rejecting approximately 7.6% less load than traditional method. The last scenario is about a case with storage and its device. The figure shows the frequency performance at the same line loss in 0.3 seconds. However, it's also simulated the limitation of the ACOC of the storage devices during the load shedding. The traditional method is immune to this limitation. It performs an overshed. Therefore, the storage device stays in the charging state. The limitation of the SUC is the treatment to adaptive methods because of the slower frequency recovered, caused by the attempt to minimize the amount of load to be shed. As a concept, the storage device acts longer. The figure shows that method LS1 is unable to prevent system stability due to the fact that withdrawal of storage support is not characterized as additional deaths. On the other hand, although the method LS2 takes the variation into account, this presents a poor initial deficit estimate due to not account for load shedding regarding voltage dips. In addition, the method LS2 provides an imprecise update of the equivalent inertia because of the presence of synthetic inertia, which impacts the load shedding process and leads to frequency collapse. In contrast, the proposed method is robust to system variation. It rejects 46% less load than traditional method, as present in table. Finally, the conclusions draw with the development of this work. The results obtained show that when compared with adaptive methods, the proposed method is more robust, and when compared with a traditional method, the proposed method is more conservative in relation to the load rejection. However, the proposed approach is a once-based method and requires a high observability level. Therefore, future analysis should evaluate the method performance again, inaccuracies, delays, and noise. I appreciate everyone's attention. We are available for questions at the time or by email. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samuel, for keeping the time of your presentation. So, is there any questions from the audience? Well, I can start with one question about, it's a really interesting new paper, and regarding the load, you assume in your simulation that all the loads you are positive loads. So because when you have a high penetration of renewable, especially along the distribution feeder, it may happen that there is a flow from low, medium voltage to high voltage, and so you think to shed load, instead you are shedding generation. So your algorithm takes into account the sign of the power flow in such a renewable dominated scenario like the one you are simulating.
I'm sorry, could you repeat, please?
Yes, you in your simulation you assume that when you have a decrease of the frequency, you shed load because you are sure that you are shedding load. But in renewable energy dominated environment context, you may imagine in the future that there is a counterflow. There is a lot of generation in the medium voltage network, and so you may have a counterflow towards high voltage, from medium voltage to high voltage due to the high penetration of renewables. So you imagine you are shedding a load, instead you are shedding generation, and so frequency goes further below. So you make a check about the sign of the load, that you are sure that you are shedding a real load and not a feeder with a lot of generation, and so you are shedding generation.
Okay.
Did you understand?
In this work, we assume that we are only just shedding load. We not describe the presence of generation load in the same level of in the same voltage level. We don't different. We don't describe this. When you shed, we just shedding load. I don't think I answered this question.
Yes, thank you. Is there any more questions from the audience? Otherwise, I have another question because we have still a few minutes. And one question was, do you consider in your paper the frequency thresholds as fixed values, essentially? For all the schemes, you consider the same value of the frequency threshold. Did you try to change the value of the thresholds of frequency for some cases? How do the comparison results change if you change the frequency thresholds for your scheme, your AUFLS?
Okay. Generally, the numbers of stage of load shedding is defined between 4 and 6 steps. The frequency thresholds values were defined in these papers are based on another reference. We know that it's important to know the amount shed per stage influence the dynamic of the load shed. However, we don't take this analysis. We don't change the frequency threshold, but we know that the change of thresholds impact in dynamic behavior of the frequency.
Okay. Yes, because I was thinking that perhaps also your analysis, your scheme is adaptive according to the real condition in terms of storage and renewables on the grid, but in terms of the amount of load you shed, because you quantitatively assess in an accurate way the deficit of power. So if you should also think to make adaptive the frequency threshold in terms of the deficit of power, not only the amount of load at fixed frequency thresholds. An idea. Okay,
Okay, it's correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Samuel.